I wish to share with you this morning the words of Reverend Dr. Tendeyeka, the legacy of caring. The legacy of caring. Despair is my private pain, born from what I have failed to say, failed to do, failed to overcome. Be still, my inner self. Let me rise to you. Let me reach down into your pain and soothe you. I turn to you to renew my life. I turn to the world, the streets of the city, the worn tapestry of brokerage firms, crack dealers, private estates, personal things in the bag lady's cart, rage and pain in the faces that turn from me, afraid of their own inner worlds. This common world I love anew as the lifeblood of generations who refuse to surrender their humanity in an inhumane world courses through my veins. From within this world, my despair is transformed to hope, and I begin anew a legacy of caring. Please join me now in singing hymn number 307, The Human Touch Can Light the Flame. Please rise in voice and in spirit. The growth of humanity. What could that possibly mean? I struggled to describe my concepts to my colleagues as we prepared for this Sunday's service. What is your theme, and what are some songs you think would suit it? What is your takeaway message? How would you describe your theme to children? I felt flustered while attempting to answer these questions. How was I supposed to express my sense of disconnect between the growth of a human, of humankind, and the growth of a person? That I saw these two concepts as polar opposites to one another, and that I believed that the growth of one inhibited the growth of the other. How do you express that concept in music, or in a children's story, or in a sermon? How do I express my thoughts when they swirl around and are messy in my own head, when I can hardly make sense of them myself? Well, I suppose the best way to explain something that is hard to express is to start at the beginning and take one step at a time. There is no question in my mind, and I'm certain in most of yours, that our species has grown exponentially over the centuries. anthropologists, sociologists, historians, biologists, and likely many other professions in different fields of studies would have scientifically verifiable proof of this fact. Humans matured from tribes of hunter-gatherers to civilizations that cultivated the land. We developed tools that allowed us to communicate with the masses. We developed the printing press, and we developed media. We've discovered truths about our world that at times seemed nonsense and things of fairy tales. Development has been made in our systems of government, in our methods of science and health developments, in our engineering and structural developments, and in our designs and technologies. Doctors have found cures to deadly diseases such as polio, diphtheria, and meningococcal disease. Scientists have put humans on the moon and sent robots to orbit Saturn. Engineers have built the tunnel, a tunnel that travels 50.5 kilometers undersea, the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building at almost 1 kilometer high, and the Bangna Bridge, the longest bridge for passenger vehicles that reaches 55 kilometers. And yet, with all of this growth, we still have not solved some of the most basic needs of humankind: housing and shelter for every person, making food and water available to all who need it, access to health care, creating a sense of security, a sense of belonging. The inequality gap among humans has grown substantially, depending on the different categories that you observe. When we observe this incongruency between the growth of humanity as the total of all human beings and the growth of humanity as the quality or state of being compassionate, sympathetic, or generous, then perhaps my discomfort and my inability to describe the theme might make a little bit more sense. When I started seminary, I thought I was going to be taking a degree in how to be a minister. I would be taking classes on how to prepare for sermons and provide pastoral care. I would learn about our history, polity, and governance structures that have made Unitarian Universalist organizations who they are today. I believed that I would learn about church structure, how to support and build leadership, and how to perform rites of passage. And while all of these things were part of my education, they ended up being mostly background information to a process of my own formation as a human being, the development of my humanity, the growth of myself as a moral person. Class assignments required that I examine my relationships with people who were from a different culture than me. I was asked to remember an encounter from my personal life and think about the ways that encounter could hold religious meaning. Where was the potential for revisiting the source of love, the source of hope, compassion, community, justice? I was asked to ruminate on my pedagogy of learning and how that pedagogy would shift the way that I chose to educate or minister to other people. I was constantly asked to observe my reactions to readings, interactions, assignments, and discussions. It was this study of self, of the way that I interact in the world, and the way that I react to the world, and the way that I respond to the world, that I think of when I consider the concept of growing humanity, which is at such a juxtaposition of the growth of humanity. How much different would our world look if the leaders of our countries were required to attend seminary? Or even just attend a class where the main topic of study was themselves, where they had to truly look at their interactions with the world, their reactions to the world, and their responses to the realities that they are living in before they would be allowed to run for political office. Also, first responders and economists and bankers. What if lawyers and judges and CEOs had to take classes in empathy and compassion before being allowed to start their careers? The studies of humanities in primary school, also called social studies, is where students learn about culture, their own and others, or current events, and perhaps small tidbits of psychology and sociology. Perhaps we need to engage the other definition of humanities during these classes, the humanities of being human, what compassion looks like, what sympathy and empathy are, and what generosity looks like. If we taught everyone these key skills, perhaps our world leaders and most powerful people would be a list of individuals such as Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Che Guevara, people who will let their hearts guide them and not their heads. The Reverend Dr. Tendeyeka, UU theologian and scholar who wrote the poem The Legacy of Caring, speaks to this disconnect, this misunderstanding between the humanity of the world and the humanity of the person. Despair is my private pain, born from what I have failed to say, failed to do, failed to overcome. Be still, my inner self. Let me rise to you. Let me reach down into your pain and soothe you. I turn to you to renew my life. This is her attempt to reconnect to the humanity within herself, to let go of the despair, to soothe away the pain, to rise to her inner self, the self that is so harmed and feels so much failure, the self that can renew her. I turn to the world, the streets of the city, the worn tapestries of brokerage firms, crack dealers, private estates, personal things in the bagged lady's cart, rage and pain in the faces that turn from me, afraid of their own inner worlds. Tendeyeka speaks of the humanity that she sees in the world, the humanity of the world that ignores the humanity of the person. This common world I love anew as the lifeblood of generations who refuse to surrender their humanity in an inhumane world. It courses through my veins. And yet, she can love this world, the humanity within it, and the humanity that generations of people bring to it. From within this world, my despair is transformed to hope, and I begin anew the legacy of caring. She finds hope, even though the world is broken and falling apart, where women carry their belongings around in a grocery cart, or where feelings of euphoria come from small crystal rocks. She can find hope, and she can create a practice of caring. In a society that ignores the legacy of caring, we see people collecting pop bottles so that they can buy food. We see natural disasters being reported by the costs of the damage before we read about the number of people being killed, the number of people being displaced, or the devastated by this disaster. We see people criminalized for addictions, for mental health lapses, and for the color of their skin. There is financial penalization for being poor and financial gain for having money. In the humanity of the world, wealth is measured by the number of zeros in your bank account, the model of your car, the square footage of your house, and your age of retirement. Whereas in the humanity of people, wealth could look a lot different. A few days ago, I saw images circling on Facebook that spoke to this same line of thought, trying to imagine a world of public safety that focuses on the humanity of people. One image states, "Someone is talking to themselves on public transit. Imagine they ride the bus without being bothered. An hour later, they are at their destination and going on with their day." A focus on the humanity of the person instead of the risk potential for the others on the bus. Another one states, "You are experiencing a mental health crisis and you are afraid. Imagine you call 311 and a first responder trained in mental health comes to your door. An hour later, you are in a safe place with your consent, with plans for follow-up care." The humanity of people. And finally, some folks are sleeping on benches in the park. Imagine a city employer comes by and checks in to see if they need a place to sleep, if they need food, water, or health care. An hour later, those who want a different place to sleep have one. Much like the words Catherine shared with us at the beginning of this hour, we gather this morning to affirm the potential we all share for achieving greater humanity than we have ever known. How do we find hope and learn about the legacy of caring when we live in a world of systems and structures that put people on the streets? When we see people sleeping on bench parks or talking to themselves on the bus and we have concerns for our own safety? The legacy of caring needs to go beyond individuals helping and supporting their communities. It needs to go beyond you and me offering change to people on the corner, holding up a paper cup and a cardboard sign. It needs to go beyond individuals and small communities coming together to build houses for habitats. It needs to go beyond YMCAs, shelters, and safe injection sites. The legacy of caring needs to go to a place where systems of power start caring more about the people on the margins, the people at the edges of society, rather than the people who line their pocketbooks. Can we change our world with schools focused on the humanity of people instead of the humanity of the world? Could we change our world if we started living into the legacy of caring? Could we change the world if the government stopped running campaigns of tasks to be checked off of our to-do lists and accomplishments achieved in a timely fashion? If the government started to act as if the humanity of the person was more important than the humanity of the world? Is it possible to have a world where the people cared more about the basic human needs of shelter, food, security, and a sense of belonging than they have cared about the growth of the economy, the growth of technology, the growth of society. What would that world look like? What problems could we fix if we started looking at the humanity of people instead of the humanity of the world?